Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we're going to talk about the Seattle City Council making moves in order to pave the way for illegal immigrants, asylum fraudsters, people who are technically in violation of our laws in our great nation that are sucking up the resources of their taxpayers because they decided to become a sanctuary city, taking over for the defunded police department and essentially policing you, the average everyday citizen. I mean, it's bad enough that these people already have god-tier rights over you. They are entitled to your taxpayer dollars more than you, the taxpayer, and you need to shut up and not say anything about it. But now they're actually going to move them into the police department so they can run roughshod over you in your communities. And of course, this is the consequence of the defund, abolish the police mindset that took hold during the Black Lives Matter riots, which of course was labeled the Summer of Love by the politicians over there.
I want to just get a clear sense of this, though, Mayor. Why do you believe the president chose to talk about domination in the face of what's happening, not just in your city, but in many instances when it comes to what the remedy is for the unrest in the country right now? What do you think this is about for him?
I think it shows a complete lack of understanding of why people are in the street. They're in the street fighting a system of domination, and he doesn't understand that. And his response is always one that's bellicose and militaristic, but he doesn't honor the military in that way either, as you've seen from the line of generals that have disputed him. So I think he says dominate because he is totally does not understand what is happening in America, and he is desperately trying to start the old fights and the old divisions that put him in power in the first place.
How long do you think Seattle in those few blocks looks like this?
I don't know. We could have the Summer of Love.
Now we're going to get into it, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Seattle City Council President Sarah Nelson is sponsoring a draft ordinance to address the Seattle Police Department's staffing crisis.
SPD continues to lose more officers than it's able to hire.
Her plan is to create a 4-person recruitment and retention office within SPD to speed up the hiring process and better stay in touch with applicants.
So real quick, right off the top, this story, this segment that I'm drawing from is actually a little bit over 2 months old. And in fact, that kind of upsets me because had I seen this local news segment months ago, I would have been able to scoop all these YouTube channels, including Fox News, because they just decided to pick up the story a couple of days ago. But the fact of the matter is, this has been a plan that has been implemented due to the crisis, and it's not something that's just a one-off proposal, it's something that is working its way through the system. But let's get into why.
The ordinance would also encourage the Public Safety Civil Service Commission to switch to or add a different application system. Nelson says the system she wants to use allows applicants to use the same form for multiple jurisdictions and is used by surrounding cities. She thinks Seattle is missing out.
If they have to use another test that nobody else is using, that is, that's a disincentive to include Seattle in their application process.
So right there, you can see there is an absolute panic in the city of Seattle over their shortage of officers. They're trying to change up their testing protocol in order to make it the same exact test as the neighboring counties. So that way they could essentially recruit from their recruiting pool after they're done, pass or fail over there, and bring them on board without having to take an additional test, which is honestly something that is pretty unusual for a major metropolitan area, a city police department, but desperate times call for desperate measures. But of course, the reason why they're desperate is due to the changes in law, changes in attitude post Black Lives Matter riots that again saw this very same Seattle legislature cut the pay of their diversity hire black female police chief because even putting minorities in the position of police officers was no longer good enough. This same area that allowed lawlessness like Chaz and Chop to take over major areas of their city is now down to 1990s levels and early 1990s levels of officers, and it's an absolute disaster. Now, obviously, this self-imposed disaster, this hole that the city of Seattle had dug themselves in, was not going to repair itself. Even upping the salaries, upping the bonuses, trying to undo the damage of the Black Lives Matter riots wasn't going to change anything, so now they're paving the way for so-called DACA recipients to become police officers officers in the city of Seattle, which apparently was not something that they were allowed to do before. And by the way, this follows suit as the same has been done or tried in other major metropolitan areas, and this is a major problem. So the number of sworn officers in the SPD was actually around 1,400 in 2017, and now they're down to 913. That is a huge, dramatic loss in officers. According to the department, there are currently only 424 patrol officers, and 280 are actually eligible for retirement. This is an absolute disaster because, again, that represents a third of the police force, essentially, that is eligible for retirement right now. Now look, there are a number of reasons for this to occur. First and foremost, a lot of these different left-wing cities have very generous retirement programs for their public officials, and essentially you do your 20, your 23 years, you can retire, collect a pension, and then go move on to another government position, do that time, and by the time you're 50, if you started at 18, you could be close to collecting 2 different government pensions with 2 different sets of healthcare benefits. Honestly, the incentive structure has always led to a system where you could be vulnerable to all these cops retiring at the same time, and this appears to be no different. However, the recruitment usually compensates for that, but in this particular case, you had a movement that was essentially calling cops evil, white, and racist murderers, even the black female police chief a racist and murderer, and when criminality started to spiral out of control, you had politicians saying that this was the summer of love, nothing was going wrong, and the cops are just going to have to deal with the fact that criminals run the show. So now that the consequences of progressive action are actually taking hold and they can't recruit police officers, they've decided to turn to the DACA recipients as a way to fill the gap in terms of police officers. However, I do want to point out that there are major problems with this. Now, a lot of people in the American population are more sympathetic to minors that were brought here without knowing by their parents illegally and grew up in the United States of America.
So I don't necessarily have a problem in practice or just the idea of DACA recipients who, look, we were talking about kids who came here through no action of their own. They were brought here as kids because their parents came here. So I don't really have any problem with that. The only issue is that it's a legally potentially untenable program because we don't know whether or not DACA is truly going to last from a constitutional standpoint.
In fact, this is why in 2012, Barack Obama, when he was running for election against Mitt Romney, in order to win over Latino votes, decided to create the DACA program via executive order. And despite the fact that any executive order should be able to be undone by another president's executive order, the Trump administration lost a court battle trying to get rid of it because they said he didn't follow the Administrative Procedures Act. Of course, Obama never followed that in order to institute it, but presumably, if Trump were to go into office and decide that he was going to undo DACA by following the Administrative Procedures Act, he should technically be allowed to do that because, let's be clear, the president, being Obama, created a whole new class of people through executive order, had no authority to do so, and that is what DACA recipients actually are. So, if you recruit them into the police department, if you allow them to take courses, take the oath, serve as officers, and then all of a sudden there is a change in a program that again is being administered wholly by the executive branch and at the whims of the executive branch, all of these people can suddenly be yanked off the force in the future. And again, this has nothing to do with whether or not you feel DACA people should be deported or should be allowed a pathway to citizenship. I'm only speaking of the practical realities of this. Also, I do have problems with people who are technically not legally allowed to be here. Again, DACA stands for Deferred Action on Childhood Arrivals, being the people to uphold the laws, because it's just not a stable situation for our police officers. And again, if all you have to do to get rid of this program as a president is to follow the Administrative Procedures Act, as the courts ruled when Trump tried to do this, you're ending up setting up the police department for an absolute disaster. And by the way, this doesn't even have to do with whether or not somebody is going to get rid of DACA as a whole. Let's say you elect somebody who's even more crazy a progressive than Joe Biden, somebody who wants to get rid of the police, who wants to really hurt the police. all you would have to do in order to make these DACA recipients ineligible to be police officers at any point in time is get the ATF to change a rule on how they're viewed in the law, and then all of a sudden, it's over for them.
The whole idea of DACA recipients being able to carry firearms, the ATF just put out a statement in January, guidance saying, oh no, don't worry, you can do this under the Gun Control Act. But I don't know if that's actually truth, right? And of course, the next ATF director could end up changing that policy. So you might be putting all of this effort and energy into a hiring practice that's not going to go anywhere because it might be unconstitutional.
So again, even though there are a bunch of different various issues about having people who are illegally in the United States, whether there's an executive program protecting them or not, become police officers, the fact of the matter is that this program is inherently unstable that allows them to have that pseudo-legal status. So essentially, these people are vulnerable, and these police departments are insanely vulnerable to slight changes in regulatory policy that could make all of the time and energy spent into recruiting these people completely null and void. On top of that, the slippery slope sometimes gets slippery. So imagine we get into a situation where this doesn't work. And by the way, I have no reason to believe that allowing DACA recipients to be cops would actually solve the recruitment problem. So then you decide that you're going to let other classes of illegal migrants try to become police officers. Over time, you're going to end up in a situation where you have integrated into our law enforcement, into our institutions, people who are not allowed to be here legally. And this is going to further hamstring policy meant to address that in the future, because then people are going to point to all these illegal immigrants in key positions in the government that should have never been there in the first place. Now, again, I am of the belief that we should definitely get rid of people in this country that are committing asylum fraud. Those new arrivals that have been coming ever since Joe Biden has been in office, the overwhelming majority of them have to go. But then we actually have to look, once we get a bunch of the obvious ones out, the criminals first, the asylum fraudsters second, these other long-term illegal immigrants after that, to assess who we have left, who we want to keep, who we want to leave, so that way we can create some kind of mechanism for people who are productive in our country to stay here while actually having some rigid border enforcement. So I'm not talking about a blanket amnesty or anything like that, but an individual case-by-case policy that deals with these people would be something that I would be in favor of. So even though a lot of people in the American population are broadly supportive of a program like DACA, I happen to not be, because it just says if you were brought here before this certain age, before this certain period of time, then you are going to be protected from deportation. And I believe that's too broad, and it incentivizes bad behavior going forward. And that's not a policy that you could implement, and you should implement through executive order. But even if it were legislation, that will deter further illegal crossings in the future. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I'm in favor of immigration policy that benefits the United States of America first, because any nation should be allowed to determine its borders and determine who should be recruited to join the nation as new citizens. This is not the same thing as people being born in this country or natural born citizens or anything like that. This is who we're allowing as guests and then eventually choose to invite to stay. And no, I don't believe that if your parents broke the law, then you're somehow automatically exempt. But the fact of the matter is, once you entrench these people in our day-to-day lives, you're going to end up in a disastrous situation. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. If you like this video, then show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias. This has been me talking about DACA recipients being eligible to be police officers very soon in the city of Seattle. Till next time.